The great 1755 earthquake that shocked Europe. How Lisbon recovered after the 1755 earthquake. This is on The Conversation. In this episode of Recovery series from the Anthill podcast by Annabelle Blight, business economy editor, podcaster, producer, The Conversation UK, and Gemma Ware, global affairs editor at podcasts, and Grace Allen, cities and young people editor, David McCallum and Katie Ross. This is by Mark Sabin, associate professor of Portuguese language studies. They explore the key moments in history when the world recovered from a major crisis or shock. We're looking at what happened after the earthquake, tsunami, and fires that devastated Lisbon in 1755 and shocked Europe. In 1755, the grand and prosperous city of Lisbon in Portugal was devastated by a huge earthquake. The Portuguese capital we see today is a product of that reconstruction and recovery after the catastrophic event. But the impact of the earthquake went far beyond the city it destroyed. It also affected politics, trade, philosophy, and religion across Europe. It's been described as the first modern disaster. We talked to three academics whose expertise covers the impact and recovery from the Lisbon earthquake in the days, months, and years that followed. Mark Sabin, associate professor in Spanish, Portuguese, and Latin American studies at the University of Nottingham, tells us about the brief efforts immediately after the quake and how the city was rebuilt, the decisive action of one of the king's ministers, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, the Marquis of Pombal, fundamentally changed Portuguese politics, religion, and society. David McCallum, reader in French 18th century studies at the University of Sheffield, outlines the media sensation caused by the earthquake. News of the disaster followed the shockwaves across Europe. In its wake, Enlightenment philosophical beliefs like optimism, which claimed that the world is the best version of itself it could be, suddenly seemed untenable. And finally, we hear from Katie Cross, research fellow at the School of Divinity, History and Philosophy at the University of Aberdeen, and she explains the questions about divine judgment the earthquake prompted in a profoundly Catholic population, and how it shaped ideas about religion and punishment in 18th century Europe. And this is on The Conversation, and of course you can listen to the podcast here. It's about 35 minutes long. Now, as you can see from the map, it's at the section of the tectonic plates between the African plate and a European plate, and it's around the Canary Islands. All those are volcanic islands, and this is the exact location of the earthquake, and Lisbon, as you can see, is right exactly on the coast. My son went there when did he go? December, I think. He had a beautiful time, and they still had buildings from church buildings from what they believe were before that time. And most of the other buildings, of course, were 18th century buildings built after the earthquake. Now, the 1755 earthquake took place in the early hours of November 1st, All Saints' Day, affected by a very powerful earthquake, violently shaking the western and southern parts of Portugal. The earthquake occurred along the major fault line separating Europe from North Africa, estimating to have originated about 200 kilometers due south of Lisbon, as we see from the map. The earthquake lasted a total of 9 minutes. 9 minutes, consisting of 3 distinct jolts. It remains one of the most violent and longest seismic events on record, with an estimated intensity of between 8.5 to 9 magnitude on the Richter scales. You can imagine it was, I guess, something like what we saw in the Japan earthquake that caused the Fukushima disaster. That's how big it must have been. You can imagine what we saw from those from that tsunami. This must have been something similar. The effects of the Lisbon earthquake were felt over a vast area, stretching from North Africa even up to Sweden. Some contemporary references suggest the earthquake's impact had an effect on Ireland as well. Upon Saturday, November 1st, at 36 minutes after 9 o'clock, a sensible shock of an earthquake was felt at Cork, Ireland, and it continued for about 1 minute. So you can imagine this thing must have made the earth ring like a bell. Then the large tsunami followed, consisting of multiple waves. Some 40 minutes after the earthquake, the waves engulfed Lisbon. Wave heights varied between 6 and 30 meters. 30 meters is about 100 feet tall along the Portuguese and Spanish coasts. The tsunami train reached Brazil to the west, North Africa to the south, and Britain and Ireland in the north. A letter from 1755 describes the arrivals of the tsunamis in Kinsale. They said a large body of water suddenly poured into the harbor. The successive risings and fallings of the water continued about 10 minutes. By different accounts received here the water was affected in the same manner along the coast to the westward of the harbor. The highest tsunami wave may have reached 13 feet or just under 4 meters. The effects of the earthquake resulting firestorms and tsunami Lisbon were devastating, destroying much of the city, causing further destruction along the Iberia and North African coast. It's impossible to know how many people died, but this event says that the figure could have been about 50,000. It would not have been unrealistic. It's also possible that there were fatalities even in Ireland, in West Cork. After every major earthquake, aftershocks occur, and over 250 tremors were recorded in Lisbon in 6 months after the 1755 event. This is according to Deep Map Cork, Ireland. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.